What's going on, Sumolings? We have another awesome webinar for you guys today. Going to give you a second to trickle in. I know we got a bunch of you who signed up. What's going on, Kyle, David, Chad? All right. Cool. What's going on, everybody? We have an awesome webinar for you today. We have a very special guest. He's going to be joining us. It's James Beshara. For those of you who don't know, I'll give you a quick bio on James. So James is a startup founder, advisor, investor, and writer based in San Francisco. He started multiple companies, selling one, Tilt, which was acquired by Airbnb, and has invested in a number of multi-billion-dollar startups such as Halo Top and ThirdLove. He's always been passionate about efficiency, stress management, and productivity, and he's also the author of the new #1 best-selling book, Beyond Coffee, A Sustainable Guide to Nootropics, Adaptogens, and Mushrooms. So today we're going to be diving into a lot of stuff regarding startups, entrepreneurship, the mental journey, as well as kind of that physical process of starting companies, as well as how you can achieve peak mental performance through all the things that James has been studying, researching, and now kind of putting out into the world. So James, thank you for joining us this morning.
It's great to be here, Chris. And Sumolings, what up?
So
by the way, I mentioned this to you, but I've got the legit mic here from my podcast. But if it's overkill or if it actually complicates the recording and the audio, just let me know.
All right. Well, let's ask the audience before we get going. Is everyone seeing and hearing clearly? Everything coming through? Let us know in the chat before we dive into this. And the other thing, 2 pieces. Yep, coming in clear. Awesome. 2 pieces before we dive in. One, we will be sending out a replay later. So if you have to jump out earlier, you missed anything, don't worry, we'll be sending that out to you guys. And also, if you have any questions, I already see some coming through, drop those in the Q&A box, and we'll circle back to those towards the end so you can get James to answer, or at least take a crack at some of the questions you guys have. And yeah, asking questions in the chat can get a little messy because people are saying a lot of things. So if we can centralize them in the Q&A,
cool,
that would be ideal. Yeah,
I will say it's super cool to see all. I've never done one of these Zoom kind of live broadcastings. It's super cool to see all of the messages. So it's this is. It can get. I guess it could get messy, but it's really cool to see that real time.
Yeah, definitely. And for those of you who stick around at the end, we also have a special gift that James is going to be giving out to you guys as well. So you can stick around for that. But let's dive into it. So James, what before we go into all of these pieces, let's kind of talk about the very beginnings. I know you've started and sold a handful of companies, but what initially got you into, the whole game of entrepreneurship? Where'd that bug come from?
Wow, that is a big question. I don't know if I have the answer for it.
Okay.
And it is. I was expecting to just jump right into the book. Here's the book, everybody. Beyond Coffee. But I actually really like that question. I really don't know if I have the answer for it. I think I followed a sort of internal compass. And I will say my great-grandfather was an entrepreneur. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. My dad is an entrepreneur. And so 4 generations of doing this, I think it's somewhat in my blood, and then also in my experience at 10 years old, just being around the dinner table when I could actively or almost semi-actively participate. The conversations were about business. I remember when I was like 13 and when my friends were idolizing Michael Jordan and Troy Aikman, and I grew up in Dallas and live here in San Francisco. But I remember, there was these sports idols, but at 13, 14, my idol was Herb Kelleher, who's the founder of Southwest Airlines. And just from all of the conversations, probably, way predating when I could actively participate. And then with 3 older brothers, and they would talk to my dad about business and things like that. So that was just always around me. And I think I always just figured I would start my own thing. And whether it was college or getting good grades or the first job out of college, all of them kind of, I think when I look back in my head, it was just obvious, like, okay, these are the things to prepare me for starting my own thing. So I think it was just always within me and always around me.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I still, that's still only partial answer.
You turned that into a pretty good answer. Yeah. What did that early career look like for you?
Oh man, the short version is I studied development economics. I thought that I wanted to go into development or international development, and I went to Wake Forest in North Carolina, where they had a major of international development, which is really cool, or development economics specifically, which is really cool. And then I worked on the ground in Cape Town, South Africa, for 2 years, working in poverty alleviation and international development, and started a business there. I thought I was going to start a business within international development and have a business kind of at a unique intersection of social and financial type of returns on my time, and was really compelled in that direction. I didn't know what the word startup was. It was just kind of like starting a business. I didn't know anything about the tech startup scene, but in 2008 and 2009, it just seemed obvious to incorporate technology within the business that I would start there. It was a nonprofit lending platform called Develo.org. And anyhow, it ended up being a website. It ended up having it was almost, the whole thing was technology based. And it ended up being one of the first crowdfunding platforms out there. So I just started to become aware of this tech startup scene halfway around the world, in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And I'd say within 6-7 months, I was reading way more about technology and the technologies that we should be implementing and things like TechCrunch than I was reading about international development. And I think that just continued to evolve into the observation that my core competency really needed to be understanding technology to have the biggest impact that I could have. And then that led to pivoting and finding that not that many people wanted to lend to nonprofits online, and especially for 3-4% return, what I thought was good, but didn't quite have product market fit. So then I broadened the scope to be a fundraising platform of all kinds of fundraising. And then there was one use case amongst friends, that kind of groups of friends pooling money for very small, seemingly trivial things, started to hijack the site experience. And I followed that user behavior when I still had maybe 1,000 users on the site, and kind of lifted open the hood, try to see why people are using it in that way. And people wanted a kind of bite-sized crowdfunding platform instead of, something like Kickstarter for $50,000. They wanted something to use for $500 or $1,000 for a group gift or a party bus. And so anyhow, that became Tilt, and that's what brought me out to the Bay Area with Y Combinator, and ultimately up to San Francisco.
Wow. So how did you develop those skills? Was it really just like following intuition and kind of on the ground training, as you're like, I have this idea, I want to grow it, I need a team behind it, I need technology behind it? Like what were the resources you were relying on, or was it just a lot of just having that confidence and that drive to push it forward?
Dude, Chris, it was total trial and error. There was no method to it. Really, it was just, this is what needs to be done. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna focus on. And I remember a good friend of mine here in the Bay Area. He has a really well-known startup. I think I can say this story. So the founder of Instacart, Apoorva, is a close friend of mine, and I remember we were having dinner one night. This is like 2013. They were like 8 months in, and we were both very early on in our careers. We had both come out of Y Combinator, and I said over dinner, I was like, "Do you think you're gonna have to?" Okay, now I can actually see why the comments right in the screen could be a little distracting. I'll try not to look at it. But I asked him, do you think you'll need to build out warehouses and sell directly, and to be able to make up the margins in the business? And he replied so calmly and coolly, he said, that's not what we need to do. That's what we'll do. It wasn't like this overarching strategic breakdown of the pros and cons of building out your own physical warehouses, like Amazon. He was just like so plain calm about it. He's like, if that's what we need to do, and that's what we'll do. And I think that also embodied, though I didn't articulate it to myself that way, I think it was very much in the early, so I had started a fly fishing company in college that didn't really work. Yeah, we sold fly fishing flies imported from South Africa and Kenya, and we put them in little tin can boxes, and there was 10 flies in there, so we call it the tin can. And it was a cool niche idea, very small market, and retail is really tough, and made more so by having an insanely small market of fly fishing. But started that didn't really go anywhere. Started a nonprofit while at college, and that a foundation where people could, a fellowship where people could request funding to go out in the field and study development economics in the field, and that didn't really go anywhere. And so so the two things that come to mind is trial and error and doing a lot of things wrong, and I still continue to do so many things wrong, but just not caring or so willfully knowing much of this will be wrong, but just going to bust through it anyhow, coupled with, oh, that's what I need to do. Okay, that's what we'll do. Like, just kind of a willful knowledge that things will blow up in your face, coupled with a willful knowledge that I'm willing just to do whatever it takes. And that those two things, I think, combined for a semi-decent approach to entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like first rule of a knife fight, you're going to get cut. First rule of entrepreneurship, you're going to suffer failures, and you just got to know that that's baked into the cake from the beginning.
Yes, and I think having a grandfather and a dad that went through it, having that exposure, I got to. So we were chatting right before we turn on the screen that you're checking out my podcast, and the podcast Below the Line. It's maybe the thing I'm most proud of. This book is a true passion project that I'm really excited to just put out into the world, and it's really cool to see the reception for it. But perhaps the project I'm most proud of is my podcast Below the Line, which started about 6 months ago, not for any external reasons, but for the internal reasons that while I was building my company, I realized I had a viewpoint growing up to see what entrepreneurship was really like, the real version of it. And that, coupled with my own experience, that was a shit ton of knife cuts. In contrast to both of those experiences, in contrast to the way that it's conventionally talked about, the blog posts, the magazine articles, the Bloomberg News interviews that make it seem like this perfectly polished, these successful stories are these perfectly polished stories from A to B. That contrast of reality to what gets talked about is so, not only bothered me so much that I started the podcast Below the Line, which is a metaphor of an iceberg, and the majority of the mass is below the waterline. The reality of creator stories is just usually quite different than that perfectly polished public version. But it wasn't that it just bothered me, that it was untruthful, to be honest, and inauthentic. It bothered me more that I think it stands in the way for so much creation that could happen in the world, because so many people jump in, and maybe this is for people listening, maybe they've experienced this. They jump into starting their own thing, and 7-8 months in, they're like, holy fuck, this is so different than what I expected, and so different than everyone else's story that I keep reading about, keep hearing about. And on that first part, that's just an expectation mismanagement. But on that second part, that's and it's tied to that second part. That second part is just flatly untrue. Everyone's story. You can come up with the most insane entrepreneurial story that you could think of in the last decade. Instagram is a good one. You can think of it like, man, they were bought a year and a half in, 14 employees for $1 billion. Instagram, the real story is they fucked up so bad with their first version, an app called Bourbon, that they had to rebrand completely and use what they learned. But that was 12 months of messing up, and letting down a lot of angel investors, and a lot of just, when you talk to them about it, psychological kind of toil before they started to get it to work. And it's just, I think, comparison is the thief of joy. It's a quote that I think about quite often. And I think the comparison to the fake is the thief of a lot of innovation and creation, because people, well, they bow out 7 or 8 months in if they feel like, I'm just not cut out for this because it's going wildly different than all the stories I've read.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me think of that Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine story where he comes up to him and he's like, about Beats by Dre, and he has a sneaker. And then Dr. Dre is like, let's not make sneakers, let's make speakers. And it's like, conversation probably never happened. It was probably a lot messier than that. But like, you hear that and you're like, well, I could never come up with a genius billion-dollar company on the spot like that. So maybe I'm not cut out to be an entrepreneur.
Dude, it is so that's so hilarious, because I think about that in what is the HBO documentary that
yeah, it's like Icons or Legends or something like that.
Right.
What is it?
Feel free to drop it in. Yeah,
someone.
Yeah, feel free to comment if people know. It's like Indestructible or I can't remember. And that's like a 6-hour documentary. Defiant Ones.
There we go.
Thank you, Ken Wells. This is so cool to have this type of interaction.
Yeah, I know.
So Ken, thank you. But yeah, that's a God, that documentary was so cool. And likely, from my perspective of being close to creation, so full of shit.
Yeah.
And it was 6 hours of a full of shit, amazing story. And that's what makes for great stories is, I mean, history, narratives, books, it's just a opinion. It's just a selection of facts. No one can actually get right what happened in World War II or what caused the Great Depression. No one, I mean, in economics, they actually there's like this consensus that we don't really know. When you go below the line, when you go deeper, it's like, yeah, we don't really know what caused the Great Depression. And there's like these 7 competing theories. And that's on something that 100,000 academics have looked at. These companies also, they're just a selection. Their stories are, and here's 2 reasons that I think this happens. And it's not just, it is untruthful, but it's not someone just choosing to be untruthful. I think it's the pressure to want to tell a good story because the world is noisy and your story needs to break through. And that pushes you to create this really cool, refined story where you select facts A, G, L instead of A, B, C, D, E. And you say, okay, yeah, that's a great story where, Jimmy Iovine is like, you shouldn't be making speakers. You should make sneakers. And they probably came up with that 7 months into pitching the idea after they've told
with their marketing team and
exactly. And they've told the creation myth, 700 times and picking and choosing which parts make the best story. But it's not just wanting to tell a great story to cut through the noise, which if you have a great product, maybe that's what you feel compelled to do is cut through the noise with a great story. But it's also the mediums. If you have a 700-word blog post on or TechCrunch article, you're not going to fill in all of the details. If you're doing a magazine interview with Fortune, you're going to put your best foot forward. If you are, being interviewed on the stage at Recode, you're going to focus on the new product that you're launching, because these mediums are so like a 5-minute TV interview. When I did 5-minute TV interviews for Tilt, it was just like, okay, it is 5 minutes goes by so quickly. I literally have the chance to make 3 points and that's it. So the medium's really not built for nuance. And what's great about podcasts, that's why I think it's just an infinitely powerful medium, or a webinar like this, where it's long form, you really can have much more nuance. And that opens up. Some of my podcast episodes are like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And many friends complain that they're too long, but I'm like, man, there's a founder in Denmark that needs to hear the real version of this story or that story and needs that extra 1.5 hours, because a lot of the guests don't really get that deep until 30 minutes in anyhow. But it's not just the desire to be untruthful. I think the mediums haven't allowed for us to be this kind of open and candid in a long time. So, or, ever. I think podcasts, I don't know. I could go on for like 5 hours on how podcasts are, I think, changing the world. I think the internet was built. honestly, I think the entirety of the internet was built for podcasting, where we can hear stories of individuals in these niche topics or categories, and you can do it for free while you're on your drive to work, while you're working out, while you're doing other things, and you can jump in and out. And it's the difference between a podcast and a book. I think it's they're both great, but they're it's like the difference of a 6-foot fence to a 6-inch one. Paying $20 for a book that takes you 18 hours to read it's actually, that's quite the commitment, versus a podcast that's 1 or 2 or 3 hours in a topic that you love, like, whatever it is, nutrition, health, peak performance, or founder psychology.
Well, and I imagine you can use it as basically like an MVP platform to test out ideas before you're writing out chapters and chapters. It's like, let me record kind of a free form episode on it, see how that goes, see what the reception is, and build upon it and hone it.
Totally. It's and that's actually what it's interesting you mentioned that, because that's what the podcast Below the Line started as an idea for a book about that inner journey of creation and founding a business, just that inner side of things, creator psychology or business psychology. We know so much about sports psychology, but we know relatively little to nothing about business psychology. Like, okay, how do we set goals for the group? How much of a death march should they be? How much of a cakewalk should they be? Things like there's so much that I had to piecemeal, and so many founders and creators, I bet you in your own life, you've had to piecemeal your kind of psychological approach, and sports psychology, which is, it's light years ahead. But so I wanted to write this book called The Inner Game, and Eric Ries from Lean Startup, quite literally MVP creator, he said that it's a cool idea for a book. You should start as a podcast first, and so to your point, that's exactly what it started out as. And some of the episodes are certainly, it's interesting to see which ones gain traction and which ones have kind of unexpected interest.
Yeah. And for Simulings on here, if you're interested in starting a podcast, I think we actually have a deal in the store right now, podcast.co, where you can get a podcast up and running without any real investment besides that. So cool to check that out. So are there
Very cool.
Any main lessons that you've learned from doing this podcast would you say the past 6 months with these interviews, like key lessons you've pulled out from these different founder stories that you kind of extrapolated?
Yeah, it definitely, it's been so in my own career, I feel like my whole 20s, I was just failing and failing and failing. Built a really large business in Tilt, what Develop.org pivoted and became, that crowdfunding application became, and we had millions of users around the world, but ultimately could not build a sustainable business model on it. It was very, very similar to something like Venmo, where it was growing, but building the business model around it, we just knew it was going to take many, many years. Venmo was about 3 years ahead of us, so that writing was on the wall, and it ultimately failed, and we had to sell to Airbnb. It wasn't a complete failure, but it certainly did not reach our goals for it, and it was really painful. And not only my reflections on that helped with kind of lessons learned, but also, to your point, just the podcast and chatting with these amazing founders, and now creators of all kinds, because we've had musicians, comedians, psychologists, artists on the platform or on the podcast. And one of the biggest ones that comes to mind, I think, is that's external or through these conversations, is detaching from results. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I made in my 20s throughout many different failures was I not only attached to results and desired results, I identified with results. Results were the only thing, so there's detachment from results on one end of the spectrum, and I was on the exact other end of the spectrum, where it was all about our results as a business, as an individual. And so that was the external kind of lesson learned, of just through this reflection of just looking back and being like, you should identify with the process. You should identify with your growth. If you pursue something saying, I want to learn about entrepreneurship by starting this, by doing, which is the best way of learning, then it's foolproof. I mean, it's fail safe. You will learn. You will achieve your goal. If you are saying, you know what, and when I look back at my real motivations, they were equal parts ego architecting, financial architecting, and social impact and impacting the community around me, the world at large was a big part of it. It's maybe 30% for the part that I talked about. But I was just as motivated by ego manufacturing and financial manufacturing, or financial engineering and the ego engineering. And that's really destructive, because that is the underlying force that really makes you identify with your business and identify with the results of your business, because all a business is its results. And that created, when you start to identify with anything that you can't fully control, then you're setting yourself up for a real psychological toll. Obviously, there's stress, there's mental health implications, but just you're setting yourself up for a really painful journey. And creating something is hard enough as it is, but adding those things like the identification with the results makes it much harder. That corresponds closely to something, an internal reflection that I've had in doing the podcast, which is not so much conversations. It's one of the first projects that I did, where I took on, where I didn't care. It wasn't that I didn't care about the results. It was just, they were completely irrelevant, because I felt like, much like with the book, I wrote it thinking, okay, if 12 people read this, I was telling you, I thought if 12 people read this, that's cool. That's cool. I just want to go through the experience of writing the book and kind of have that first pancake is the messiest, just get it out of the way, and I'll learn for the book that the podcast will be based on. Or that the podcast is a part of. But I think the real observation or realization in doing the podcast, in taking on a project where I'm just pulling on a little thread, is instead of a startup, a tech startup, software startup, where it's this big conceptual, ambitious pursuit, where it's like, let me sit on a couch and think how big this can be, or strategic decisions early on to make sure that we have defensibility and the business plan thinking. Instead, the podcast was a true detachment from results, because it was like, all right, how am I going to start where I'm not betting the farm on this thing? I'm going to do this because I feel like people need to hear the real stories of entrepreneurship. And when I heard them over dinners or over coffees, when I was going through just the trough of sorrow, it was so powerful. I was like, I want to put this on a podcast and allow others to listen to it around the world. That it was similar. I didn't care if 12 people listened to it or not. So all of that is to say, it was one of the first projects I've ever done where just the means justified the means, or it wasn't like, this is the strategic step towards that, or justifying some end. It was just every single episode, every conversation is, I'm just like, holy shit, that was really illuminating for me, hopefully for a few listeners. And that has been it's hard to put it into words, but that's been a strange and such a cool experience to learn what it's like to pull on a small little thread, rather than say, let me go change the world. And this is the ABC step to get there.
Mm-hmm. So that obviously seems like the mentally healthiest way to deal with that, like to be able to detach from those results. But I could also imagine people kind of feeling like, it's nice in theory, but how do I actually put that in practice, where like I am on deadlines, or I am working at this company, and I have investors, or I have employees relying on me. Like, I feel like that can kind of feel like it's like, yeah, money is not everything, but if you don't have money, it's like, yeah, but all I want to focus is on this, or like all I want is a successful company. So how do you separate that out, especially when you see all of these founders who do kind of go through this burnout, but maybe if it wasn't for that period of them just like driving it to the wall, would they have not been as successful? Or could you take these principles go back from the beginning of your journey and have seen like equal or greater success if that, wasn't a part of it?
Man, so much comes to mind on that topic. So I'll just rifle off thoughts.
Yeah.
Chris. Hopefully this is helpful for people. The Navy SEALs have a quote that I think it's the SEALs, it might be the Marines, that goes, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And I've done it fast. We built Tilt to a $400 million valuation in 3 years, and then went through a very painful failure and acquisition, Airbnb. And I was very thankful for that. I'm thankful for one, I'm mega, insanely thankful for the experience, but thankful for being able to still build something of value to Airbnb. Our technology powers the split payments amongst Airbnbs on Airbnb.com. So that's, our technology was very useful for a business where about 60% of the revenue is groups traveling together. But it was still insanely painful. We were going so fast. Every step of the way, I was addicted to short-term results. Every day, every week. And it got us far. It got us, we went through Y Combinator when we were funded by Andreessen Horowitz for our Series A and our Series B. We were one of 2 companies that they've ever done their A and the B for. We did so many things in that short term, right? Because I was addicted to short term results, but you actually really need to be addicted to long term results. That needs to be your obsession. So the second thought that comes to mind is Amazon and Jeff Bezos has a quote, be competitor aware, not competitor obsessed. Be customer obsessed. And I think you can borrow that line of thinking and say, okay, be short-term aware, but be long-term obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you're going to take it's a shifting of your priorities, and you might not feel that good in the short term. Another thought that comes to mind is Y Combinator has distilled the majority of failures down to premature scaling, essentially scaling up and expanding the business too fast. The way that you do that is because you're addicted to these short-term results, whether it's hitting monthly growth goals, which you should be aware of. You shouldn't, it's just like Amazon's quote, you should be aware of competitors, but not obsessed with them. We were obsessed with these short-term goals. And whether it's a Series A financing or a seed financing, getting funding, try, and this is what I tell founders, aim to sacrifice in the short term for that long term. When you're having a conversation with a seed investor, it's not about the short term, in 30 minutes, in an hour, let me try to convince them. It's much more around, let me bring them in, see if they're the right fit. One, I get a free hour with someone that could be really smart. Let me bring them into the fold on what I'm dealing with. You don't have to share too much unless you do want to just share everything because you need to tell someone. But it can be a little bit more strategic, where it's not, let me short-term close this meeting, but it's more, let me mid-term and long-term bring this person into the fold, because we actually have a fraud problem on our payments side of things, and this person has a lot of payments experience. That type of short-term sacrifice for that long-term goal. There's the hashtag long-term greed. It's a part of that as well, where you're just sacrificing and reprioritizing for the long term. I know in my experience, I was only prioritizing for the short term, and it worked really well for 3 years, 4 years. But ultimately, it blows up. Maybe you get lucky, but ultimately, you will confront the truth. And the truth is, you haven't been investing in the long term enough. And man, if you're really convincing, then you can get pretty far just leaning on that. I love, someone recently, I was reading somewhere, I can't remember, but someone recently compared a lawyer to a scientist. And a lawyer's job is just to convince the 12 jury members, and you win the case. You win. It's over. Can't retry the case or retry the person. So the whole goal is to convince. And in sales, the whole goal in many ways is to convince. Whereas a scientist gets kudos to 3 years later be like, I was fucking wrong. I was like terribly wrong on that. And this is how we were wrong. And this new data is now proving that we're wrong. You get kudos in the community for that. You also don't get any kudos to being right in the short term. And I think viewing building a startup and confronting truth with startups are just confrontations with truth daily. You're going to confront the truth at some point, even if you brush it under the rug. You might as well confront it all, starting today, starting right now, starting right after this webinar, with confronting the 2, 3, 4, 5 things that you just know you've been pushing away because, just got to get that $500K in funding, because then we can actually solve those things. And that sometimes isn't the case.
Yeah. This has become very existential very quickly, because I can see how this just applies to all of these different elements of people's lives. And especially if, you are a founder or you're running a company, it's like all those different elements come into play. Like, this is your baby, this is your life. It trickles into these other sides, and what you're pushing off and sweeping under the rug and just saying, hey, well, let me make this other kind of sacrifice for the long term, as opposed to making a sacrifice for the short term, what you're saying, to kind of reap those benefits. So, I mean, let's go into that for you a bit. I mean, I know you had that blow up you were talking about. I mean, how did that manifest? How did that come about? Was that kind of hitting at the same time as all this kind of tilt Airbnb type stuff with the coffee and all that?
Yeah. So in that addiction to these short-term results, and I don't mean it to be existential, it is both on the macro, I believe, correct, and it's also on the micro, correct. My addiction to short-term results meant that, man, I was chugging a lot of coffee to become very convincing in each conversation, or to recruit this person. And as a CEO, don't get me wrong, you've got to be convincing, because you are trying to do something very, very difficult that people, their default will be, that's insane, or that's stupid, or that's silly. That you've got to be convincing to find the rabble rousers that are willing to come alongside you. But my short-term addiction towards weekly goals, monthly goals, it manifests in very practical ways. And that was, I can just outwork this. I can just go faster and harder. And a way that, America, our society is very anti-addiction on the surface, but really it's ambition that's the one addiction that society collectively encourages. And so in encouraging, go faster, go even bigger, be this epic, anomalous startup, it will encourage you, the founders that are listening, or any creators that are listening, it'll encourage you in very practical, small ways, like staying up all night, getting poor sleep, having a really shitty diet, not exercising, because, man, an hour at the gym each day or an hour run each day, I could be so much more productive than going for a run. It manifests itself in, for me, 6 years ago, I ended up in the ER, and it's the way that the book starts. I ended up in the ER with a heart rate that was beating at 170 beats per minute, and it had been beating at 170 beats per minute for 3 straight weeks. I had developed a heart condition from overconsumption of caffeine and stress. And the heart condition, go to the doctor, and subsequently we went across the street to the ER. But where the book starts, and to maybe focus a little bit on the book, I was drinking about, John, I see your question. I was drinking about 6 to 7 cups of coffee a day. Outrageous. And it was, so you build up your tolerance to coffee, to caffeine, within 20 days. It takes you 12 days to get off it. If you want to see how crazy, do you drink coffee, Chris?
I do. And I took once we were lining up this webinar, I took 30 days off just to see what that was like. And it was an experience. I think it was probably about a week or so of just like every morning, because I have a very specific morning routine that I'll do in the morning. And so like, I'll make my coffee, and I kind of have like the stack of books that I'm reading. So I sit down at the same table and I'll read them. And I noticed, like, taking the coffee out of the routine, it just wasn't the same switching it up with tea or something like that. So the routine there kind of got messed up a bit. And I noticed, that first week or so, was really difficult. I would just have that craving. And even at night, I would be like looking forward to having my cup of coffee in the morning. And I would have maybe like 2 or 3 cups a day. But then, yeah, after a week or so, it's just like that craving and that desire for it was just gone. And it was like water was fine to do. And I'll also kind of pair that with intermittent fasting for 16 hours a day or so. And I used to just always like think I needed the coffee to push through that fasting period in the morning till about like noon or 1 o'clock. But it became a lot easier. Yeah, after that. And by the end of it, once I hit my 30 days, I'm like, I actually want to push this a little bit further, which was annoying for my girlfriend because she was like, let's finally have coffee together. But I'm like, I don't feel like I need it right now. Like I like riding out this high of not needing it. And then when I had my first cup back, it was actually in Dallas when we were on a trip there. And it was underwhelming, to be honest. Like it wasn't as good as I remembered it being. And now I'm just drinking like most strictly like 1 cup in the morning at like 8 o'clock in the morning. And like, that's it for me.
Yeah. Did you notice, going back on it, did you notice, wow, this is pretty stimulating? Sometimes in the negative sense, did you notice any anxiousness later in the day versus the days that you didn't have any?
I think I definitely felt like the positive benefits of it pretty quickly, like coming back, but there is that kind of like knot in the stomach anxiety that it just kind of like triggers, which is one of the reasons why I was going off of it. Cause I'm like feeling a bit more anxious than I feel like I should. So let me take out at least one thing that could be contributing to it and kind of run that 30-day experiment.
Yeah, well, and for the pro tips, and we can, shift the conversation just to the book for right now. And again, it's the book is Beyond Coffee, and I think people saw it in the description, but the real title, the full title is Beyond Coffee: A Sustainable Guide to Nootropics. Some people say nootropics, nootropics, adaptogens, and mushrooms. And so it covers just the world beyond coffee and hundreds of scientific studies backing over 50 different compounds that nature gives us. Some are synthetic, but the majority are natural, that nature gives us beyond coffee and beyond this thing that we've been drinking for the last 300, 400 years. Nature gives us. So funny, 6 years ago, I thought, so let me tell you a story. So I'm in the doctor's office but I do want to mention real quick for people that want to try. It takes 12 days to get to a withdrawal from caffeine completely. And so 12 days, the best way to do it is to drink decaf. So then you still have that kind of like oral fixation that you want in the morning, that ritual. Decaf, which has a little bit of caffeine in it, but it's a very small amount. Decaf and then Advil the first 3 days.
I will say those 3-4 days of headaches were pretty brutal, which I was not. Right. I was hoping I would slide by without those, and they were just pounding me.
Yeah, so 2 cups of decaf and 2 Advil, 3 Advil, and you can get around it. Every year I try to do about 2 weeks off of coffee, off of all caffeine, off of all nootropics, everything. And but yeah, so decaf is the best way to get around that. You also get to keep the ritual with your girlfriend or your significant other. But so I'm sitting in the doctor's office 6 years ago, and the doctors asked me this litany of questions about my habits, and I wasn't sleeping well, wasn't eating well, wasn't exercising well, but he finally got to coffee, and I told him, yeah, I drink a lot of coffee each day. He's like, how many cups of coffee? I said 6 to 7, and he just nodded, jotting down on his pen and paper, and he said, so you have what's called atrial fibrillation, and it's heavily contributed to from stress and caffeine consumption. But your caffeine spikes your cortisol, your stress hormone. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know what cortisol was. He said it spikes your cortisol and spikes your stress. So really the biggest contributing factor to your heart condition is your coffee consumption. And he said, have you ever tried switching to green tea? It has L-theanine in it, which actually helps decrease your cortisol and calms you down, and extends out the absorption of caffeine over a longer period of time. And I mean, out of everything I heard that day in the doctor's office, from we need to go to the ER. You have a heart condition, 170 beats per minute. And then me doing the math of, holy shit, I felt like this for 3 weeks. So I'm not joking. The most alarming thing that I heard that day was that I'm going to have to, that two things. He said, you're going to have to cut your caffeine consumption down to about 80 milligrams a day. And I was like, what is that? Like 2 cups, 3 cups? And he's like, that's about a half a cup of coffee. I was like, shit. Okay, that was super alarming. And then the thing that I think was lodged in my brain that started this whole journey was hearing that there was this stuff called L-theanine, when coupled with caffeine, can help extend the absorption of caffeine and can help calm me down, decrease stress while getting the alertness of caffeine. That single thought, and then I Googled L-theanine. That single thought has led to the last 6 years of a rabbit hole of seeing what else can I not only combine synergistically with caffeine, but more importantly, and get the most out of that 1 cup of coffee a day. Or now I drink matcha green tea, and it's that is my 1 cup of caffeine. But not only what can I combine with it, but also just the crazy wild world of what else does nature provide us beyond just this one thing, coffee or tea. Another thing, these 2 things that we all have just come to believe it's the end all be all of energy management. And the 2 things that come from that I want to make sure that I mention are, one, I'd say my observation 6 years ago was like, well, there's no way that there's anything better than coffee, because if there was anything better than coffee, 7 billion people in the world, we know about it. It's obvious. Like, just everyone drinks it every day. If there was anything better, we'd know about it. That was my observation 6 years ago. Now on the opposite end of all of this research, and the book has 240 scientific studies. There's actually quite a bit of research. We know that there are better things than coffee. Now it's the opposite is true in my head. It's like, okay, what are the odds in the 21st century that we're just going to continue to drink this one thing that we've been drinking for 300 years, instead of coming up with something much better in the 21st century that actually gives us productivity, not just energy. So the first thing I want to mention is that story and that kind of chronological path, and the fact that I think it's obvious we're going to come up with something better in the 21st century than just this, black liquid or tea that we drink each morning. But also, I think it's the other thing that I want to make sure that I mention is we think that coffee, or I thought the coffee or energy drinks were the end all be all of energy, but it actually really should be any exogenous compounds like nootropics, and we can get into those, like mushrooms, like adaptogens, which decrease your stress. They should be 5th on your list of things that you think about. And the book goes into detail on this. Really, the first 4 things should be sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, and then exogenous compounds when you're thinking about productivity as a whole. And productivity is more than just energy. I'm throwing a lot at you, but I want to make sure that I mention this, because the book is about nootropics, these exogenous compounds. But really, man, if you wake up every morning at the same time, you're going to have much better energy management, and that will help set your 24-hour circadian rhythm to then start to go to sleep more or less at the same time. You'll have so much more energy than an extra 2 or 3 cups of coffee, especially since your tolerance will literally build in 20 days. So you have people that drink their 2 cups of coffee for 50 years, and then they stopped getting energy from it. They built up the tolerance, 20 days in that 50 years. Sleep is the first thing. Second thing is diet. And the biggest pro tip there is limiting your alcohol intake. And 3 cups or 3 drinks of alcohol, wine, spirits, beer will totally wreck your sleep. It will cut your sleep quality in half, anything over 3 drinks. So that's the first thing, and that wrecks that priority number 1. Third thing, exercise. The pro tip there is just 15 to 20 minutes of intense aerobic exercise a week. Helps detoxify your body. It's one of the best natural cognitive and improving things that any of us can do. 15 to 20 minutes. Ideally, if you can cycle, that's been shown to be the best. But running is great as well. It's 15, 20 minutes. You don't need to go to the gym for an hour. You don't need to get a gym membership. Fourth is stress management. Even a 5-minute meditation practice, 10-minute meditation practice is great. Another pro tip there is gratitude journaling. 5 minutes of writing down 3 to 5 things you're grateful for in the morning starts within 30 days. And I think far sooner than this. I'm an investor in a company called Jour, which is an online journal. It's a great journaling app. But just orienting your mind in the morning towards the things you're grateful for, I think 3, 4, 5 days in starts to change your mind. When I was in a really bad funk at the acquisition of Tilt, gratitude journaling, I'd always had a meditation practice, but gratitude journaling, and then this second thing, meditating, and this I guess third thing in stress management is practicing the art of under committing. I think we whether it's email, your job, socially, texting, whatever it is, looking at different events you could go to for professional networking, whatever it is, we are overrun with things that we can commit to. And if you practice the art of under committing, being like, yeah, I don't have anything the next few nights in a row, that actually can be so powerful for just your mental health and kind of recouping, just being able to wind down, recouping sleep, whatever you need to do, just winding down is so powerful. And then the fourth thing on that stress management is being honest. I think one of the best and most under-discussed stress management therapies out there that's at every one of our fingertips is being honest. And I know that when I would get caught up in highly stressful situations at Tilt, just even personally, it would be overcommitting, backing out of those commitments, which is a real form of dishonesty, of being unreliable. It would be out of setting these crazy expectations and thinking, okay, we're just going to figure it out, and not being honest with myself on what we could actually achieve. There's a lot of forms of not being real with oneself or with others that go beyond just the generic lying. There's a lot of lying that we tell ourselves, and so I think that's one of the most powerful stress reduction techniques that one can take on, is being honest in every scenario. And then fifth, it's all this stuff covered in the book.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's sleep, which wake up every day for 8 days. Exercise 3 times a week, 15 to 20 minutes. We have
awesome. You
journaling and meditation.
read the book, because I didn't mention the 8 days, but yeah, it takes about 8 days every morning. It takes about 8 days, and it starts to set your 24-hour circadian rhythm.
Awesome. And that app for journaling, is it just Jour?
That's right, Jour.
Okay. Awesome. And being honest. Yeah. The another thing I heard you mention in a different podcast was the Alan Watts idea of writing 250 words on what you really want in life. And it's like, can you really be honest with yourself enough, or do you even know yourself well enough to know what those things are and what you actually want?
Yeah. You said, what's some practical advice? You asked what's some practical advice for founders that are saying, I'm setting their goals and I really want my company to be this or that.
Yeah.
How do you know that's what you really want? What do you really want beneath that? I think the practical advice is to spend time, 3 hours on a Saturday, spend time reflecting, okay, what do I really want? When I say that I want my company to go from this to this, or with this idea that I have to go from this to, what do I really want? Is it ego manufacturing? Well, why do I want that? I in my 20s, I wanted to be on the cover of a magazine for building a successful startup. It was that seemingly trivial and stupid. But when I thought about it, it wasn't just a high level or one version of ego kind of driven behavior of like, I want to be on the cover of a magazine because that's because I'll get admiration. It was equal parts of that and a deeper reflection of, I want to be my purpose and what drives Meaning in my life is to be useful, to be, valuable and be useful to those around me. And that's a really compelling way to see that you're being useful, as if a magazine that you read all the time says, we value what this person has created so much, we're going to put them on the cover of our magazine. It wasn't just ego manufacturing in the vain sense. It was ego manufacturing in the sense that I don't have the confidence or the security to know that I can be useful unless I have other people tell me that I'm useful. And it was a pretty deep sense. So what I wanted wasn't just my company to do well. What I wanted beneath that was to be useful, or to be seen as being useful. And then beneath that, it was to be useful. And Alan Watts, one of my favorite philosophers, who has amazing lectures on, he just happened to be a philosopher that was around at a time where you could record the lectures. And in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, his lectures were recorded and they're on YouTube for free. And one of the things that he talks about is we don't really know what we want. And we don't really know what we want for a few reasons. First is that we already have it, that there's this sick assumption in the question of, what do you want, Chris? What do you want, Susan? What do you want, Apurva? That there is this thought that we don't have what we want. So we should just keep looking for what we want. And maybe you actually have what you truly want. And that's a sick assumption. The second reason that we might not know what we want is there is no us. There is no static you. Chris from 10 years ago is different from the Chris now. And if you're changing every 10 years, every 5 years, what I wanted when I was 18 is vastly different than what I wanted at 33. So if I'm changing every 15 years, every 5 years, that means I'm changing every year. That means I'm changing every 90 days. And so there's no static you to just say, this is what I want. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not. But he goes on to say, spend a few minutes, to what you pointed out, to write down 250 words of what happiness looks like to you. And when you're forced to go beyond 8 words, 9 words, 10 words, holy shit, it's really hard to get specific on what actually you want, what happiness or what your paradise is. What does your personal paradise look like? That's the real exercise. And you could say, in 8 words, I heard a really smart friend, one of my brother's friends growing up, super smart, went to Duke, really successful and smart guy. I remember him saying one time when I was like 16 or 17, I heard him say his goal in life was to be sustainably happy. I thought it was so smart. Oh, right, because you don't want to just be happy and then have it be unsustainable. I thought it was so smart. The dude had no freaking clue what he's talking about. That's being sustainably happy. That's perfect exercise. And that will fill 6, 7, 8 words, but try to write 250 on what your personal paradise looks like. And it will highlight, it's a great exercise to highlight how little we actually think through the specifics of what our personal paradise would be. And so take a few hours on a Saturday in a very practical way. Again, it's not meant to be existential. In a very practical way, do it in 20 minutes. Try to write down 250 words of your personal paradise. And it's quite difficult. And it does force you to get beyond just what you want your company to be and think about what you truly want. Then you might realize, okay, company is one way of getting there, but I could actually get there in a handful of ways. I can be useful in a handful of ways. For me, it was to be useful. I could get there in a handful of ways. And it's not just my company needs to be successful and be X, Y, Z. I could actually be quite useful in the next 30 minutes with the person to my left or right or my neighbor across the street.
Have you gotten closer with those 250 words as time's gone on?
Stop writing it.
Yeah.
I stopped. I really don't. Well, to be most candid, I think I just really recognized or identified with Alan Watts' first reason that you don't know what you want. I felt like I had it. when I really thought about what I wanted in life to be useful, I realized, man, I can be useful to my wife, our daughter, our community. I think about these things each day written on my to-do list. It's God, family, community, then work. So work is fourth. And I think work can be a valuable way to impact and to be useful to those first few things. It can be expressions of the first few things, but it's fourth. And I'd say my meaning in life is derived from being useful, and I get to be useful. All of us can be useful right now to the people around them. And I'd say my MO, the way that I'm most useful is to encourage. And just the way that I am built, I think I'm just built to be an encourager. That's why I love angel investing. I really feel like it's a perfect alignment with a highly leveraged way to encourage others, encourage creation and innovation, pushing the world forward. But this week, there's a San Francisco Chronicle article, I think coming out today or tomorrow. My wife and I are helping this local bookstore in our neighborhood in San Francisco that was going to go out of business. And I feel just as much joy, or feel so grateful to be able to take everything I've learned in business to help them, to help kind of save this local treasure. And I derive way more pleasure out of that than kind of some financial return or career type of milestone that I thought was really important and earlier in my career life.
Yeah. It's interesting how you can. I imagine the older you get, the more clarity you get on those elements, where success becomes a lot less defined by one specific track, and you can figure out how those can be applied, or the goals that you're chasing, or the way you want to be useful can be expanded into a million different areas. It doesn't have to just be linear career success that kind of is that model that you see on the cover of magazines.
Right. So it's do I want to be on the cover of a magazine? No, because I feel very strongly. This sounds Pollyannish, but I really feel strongly that I have everything that I want. It's not even I feel strongly, I know it. I have everything that I want, and that's going to go through trials, tribulations, but I've gone through so many trials, tribulations, way outside of work as well in life. And it is, if people want to learn a little more about me, they can listen to the intro episode for Below the Line. But it is, I love the trials, tribulations. They are the rich, they're part of the richness of life. So I welcome those, and I've had them before and seen so much growth from them. The concept of post-traumatic growth in psychology, it's a newish concept, and not everyone has the orientation for post-traumatic growth, but I seem to, and I really enjoy the trials, tribulations, that it's like, okay, I even want those in some deeper sense, that in a way that I don't fully know what will happen or what fruit will come from those. I want those as well. And yeah, it's in a way this bookstore, and it's just on my mind right now because the article, they took a photo of our little daughter at the front of it's a little children's bookstore. It's just so cute. And that's way more meaningful to the things that I care about than cover of magazines. It's probably going to be a small little article in the newspaper, but it's way more useful to our community than something that can actually be disconnecting from a community. I think there's a lot of envy and jealousy that comes from certain types of exposure, versus this, I hope, starts to inspire others to say, yeah, you can be a freaking boss at Facebook or Google, but you also can take that experience and help a business that's struggling in your local community. Or you can be a startup founder that has a great 4-person company in Austin, Chicago, wherever it is, but you can also lend that to your community. And you're going to get a lot of just joy and fulfillment from that. But your community then gets better. It's pure, self-interest as well. And it's a small little write-up, but I'm in a way, the reason I want to even talk about it is I'm truly proud of that, because it's not about the write-up. It's that I hope that it inspires other startup founders around San Francisco that maybe, I doubt they'll read it actually because it's a newspaper, but it is, hopefully the story gets around that we can all impact our communities. And then it's, like I said, it's pure self-interest because we're the beneficiaries of the quality of our communities.
Well, and the element of reward is also a lot more tangible and real and concrete. Like this past weekend, my girlfriend and I went out to a farm in Austin. They do like a youth program out there, and you just like volunteer for a few hours. You help them harvest and help them plant and all that. And it was like, because we were just kind of feeling that same way. Like so much of what we do is just like online, and you're disconnected from it. And you can hear like stories from people, and they write in, and that's great. But actually getting out there and seeing the faces and interacting with people and just actually physically using your body to make an impact in just like a very small local way, it changes your day. And then that's what we've been talking about for the past few days to our friends and things like that, because it really does just touch you in a much different way.
Yeah, it's, the word man is Latin for, it's comes from the Latin root term manus, which means hand. It actually isn't male, female. It actually comes from the Latin for hand, to be handy, to be useful. In mankind, that's where our fulfillment comes from, is to be useful. Is that's the expression of love. That's the route to connection. And it's so, going back to the means, so much of engineering, whether it's quite literally coding something up, whether it's building mechanical engineering, invention, whether it is financial engineering, ego engineering, company engineering, they're all means to ends. And they can be successful means to those ends. But if you can find ways to where the means are justify the means, where being useful to your community is its own, to exactly your story, it's its own fulfilling part, then you're getting this positive feedback loop that will feed you through the ups and the downs. If you're only engineering from here to here, and it looks like it's going south, or it looks like it's going down here, or it's not fitting your expectations because it's a means to an end that you have in your head, you have kind of just imagined, then you're always going to be judging against that end. And like we said at the beginning of the conversation, you don't have control over everything. As a founder, maybe you have the most control of all factors, but it still might be 10%, 30%, whatever it is. You do not have 100%. And you connect to this engineering towards this end. This is just practical. You've got to figure out a way where you're enjoying it each day, where you're loving it each day. And I don't think there's any, at least in all of my reflection in the last few years and doing the podcast and thinking through, this episode is supposed to be on peak performance, but honestly, I think this is the below the line version of peak performance, to make every step through any race that you're running as true and as fulfilling and as energizing as it needs to be, to make that next step. And that next step, it's really practically speaking, it's really useful if you love each step, if the means justifies the means. And I think for me, it was recognizing, okay, well, what gives me energy? I mean, it's not just nootropics. Although someone asked, what are the nootropics that I take each morning? Go to, we're going to share a link at the end of this where people can download the book for free. And they can also go to beyondcoffeebook.com and get the ebook for free, as well as my morning stack, the things that I take each morning. Yes, those are energizing. But what's way more energizing is the stuff we're talking about in this conversation. And at least they're quite complementary. And I think what's really energizing for me in every step of whatever race that I'm doing at the moment is, okay, am I being really useful right here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All of this stuff seems to be just the nuclear reactor that's pushing all of this other stuff forward. So getting that really solidified and built in, and then the sleep, exercise, journaling, nootropics, all of that then helps kind of fuel that. But starting from that place of being set on what your intentions are, what your why is, how are you being useful? That's the core of it all. So to transition into some of those things, because I know people are on here to hear a bit more about that. What are first off, what are some of the most overhyped things in kind of like the nootropic? I know we talked a bit about like Red Bull, and obviously coffee is a big one we've discussed. Any other ones that you always see, like you'll see a magazine article about and you're like, not acai berries again, or whatever it is?
Yeah, there's the commonplace, and then the stuff that kind of gets hype and talked about, but I think is quite dangerous. The commonplace, the one that comes to mind is, dude, I think caffeine is way overhyped. It's powerful. It is one of the most powerful nootropics out there. Nootropics just meaning cognitive enhancing compounds, and it's quite powerful. But it has as we talked about, a biological cost for everyone, not just me and the heart condition that I developed, but everyone has a spike in cortisol with a cup of coffee that's similar to a near accident on the highway. The near accident on the highway that can stress people out for 3, 4, 5 hours afterwards, that are just shaken up by it. A cup of coffee is doing that to us each morning as well. That is, and you do adjust and you build a tolerance to it, but go 2 weeks off of coffee and then drink a cup, and you'll feel that anxiousness that you didn't feel during those 2 weeks. I know when I was feeling stressed and anxious with my job, with the company that I founded, I thought it was just work stress, because I would, in my mind, attribute it to things that there was endless things to worry about. When you go off of caffeine for 2 weeks, you actually realize, holy shit, your cortisol not only goes down, but you start to realize, I don't have this kind of like anxiety in my chest. At least many people that have that. There's some that don't have that spike in cortisol, but many people do. The book talks about, and that's why the subtitle is A Sustainable Guide to Nootropics, Adaptogens, and Mushrooms, because I think the entire space, what me and the co-authors, Dan Engel, who is a psychiatrist and neurologist out of Denver, and he's one of the biggest experts in this space. He's a scientific advisory board leader for Onnit, Alpha Brain, and Onnit is really well-known supplement company. Catherine Haynes.
Austin.
Out of Austin, that's right. Catherine Haynes, who is a medical researcher who also co-wrote the book with us. And one of the things that we felt was missing from the space was that so much of the literature or the online forums are about these boosts for 8 hours. Something like modafinil will give you a boost for 8 hours, and you feel great for 8 hours, but then you pay for it the next day. It is you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And there's so many modafinils like that. The racetam family is like that. There's so many nootropics. Over caffeination is like that. So many nootropics will give you that short-term boost. And if you're addicted to short-term results, maybe you feel good for 8 hours, you feel good for 2 or 3 days, but it will wreck your sleep. And our approach was, look, we want to advise people on a path where you feel better on day 7 than you feel on day 1, and you feel even better on day 77 than you feel on day 7. This sustainable approach where it just crescendos and gets better, rather than these short-term spurts that you're paying for the next day. That was my personal approach to where, if I'm running a company, if I'm going through really stressful times, that I don't want these short-term boosts. I really want to feel great 30, 60, 90, 180 days later. So the things that I'd say the overhyped ones are things like Adderall, and methamphetamines. That's what Adderall is, and it is kind of in this recognition that productivity is more than just energy. Stimulants, Adderall, modafinil, caffeine, they will stimulate you for a short period of time. But productivity, in my viewpoint, is energy, cognition, creativity, memory, focus. Like you could have, everyone knows that if you've had one too many cups of coffee, then you realize, okay, I'm energized, but I'm not focused at all. I'm jittery. Yeah. So it's energy, cognition, and then the third piece is balance. So are you anxious? Are you stressed out? And how can you actually be balanced and actually de-stress from the things that are happening around you? And I'd say that insight shifts the thinking from stimulants towards things like adaptogens, things like ashwagandha or rhodiola rosea, which are herbs that will help de-stress you and decrease your cortisol, and help give you balance. And I only realized this 4 or 5 years into this space that man, I'm not getting through this 87 emails that I have in front of me, or these 3 big to-do list items. It's not just for lack of energy. It's actually like, shit, I have this low-grade, overwhelming anxiety, pervasive. I wouldn't say overwhelming anxiety. I'd say low-grade anxiety that's pervasive each day. And I think we all have that when we have these our devices. That knot in the stomach, an email inbox that is never ending, 47 little red notifications on our phones. It's pretty easy to find ourselves in the modern world we live in. I think we just all have this low-grade, pervasive anxiety that stops you in the short term from getting these things done that you need to do. Whether it is those 37 emails, whether it is those 2 or 3 to-do list items, or whether it is getting to the gym or doing that 15 to 20 minutes of exercise, you're like, but I have these 8 other things that I need to do too. And that low-grade pervasive anxiety in the short term, I think, becomes overwhelming anxiety for many of us in the medium and long term, because these things just continue to stack up. But if you can chip away at that low-grade anxiety in the short term with things like stress management, meditation, honesty in all scenarios, the things that we talked about, gratitude journaling, along with things like adaptogens, which the shorthand for nootropic is essentially cognitive enhancing compound. Shorthand for adaptogen is de-stressing compound. And you couple that, you add those to your morning stack or your morning ritual, then it actually can get rid of that low-grade anxiety for you to start tackling these things that are on your to-do list and make you really productive. That just never entered my mind as a productivity component until going deep into this research, that actually adaptogens, or things that will de-stress me, are quite effective at making me really productive. And so the first subtitle is nootropics in the book, but adaptogens and then mushrooms, they're all really, really powerful ways for you to be that ultimate goal, productive, and not just energetic or energized.
Yeah. So I just posted it for everybody, the link where you can go and download a full free digital copy of James's book, Beyond Coffee, which, I mean, after going through it, it's basically like an encyclopedia of all of these different. Yeah.
This isn't Beowulf. This isn't James Joyce. It's not The Great Gatsby. It's a very short read. And I didn't want it to be any longer than it needed to be. Every one of us are sick of the books that are 3 times longer than they need to be. So you could read it in about an hour, and it's encyclopedic, hopefully written in a very layman's terms type of approach. But it's very straightforward and kind of gives a breakdown with these sustainability scores on each compound. That's on a scale of 1 to 5 stars on the things that 4 to 5 stars you can take every single day. And the compounds, the benefits will actually build and compound daily. And the things that are 3, 2, 1 star, you'll read why, whether it's safety or whether it's unsustainable type of energy boost. There are reasons that, and some of them are they're talked about quite a bit, but we don't have any research to back up any of the claims that are made about many of these compounds. And so we talk about those compounds in detail as well.
Awesome. So where would you recommend somebody starts with this? Like, is there a recommended pick, like 3 or 4, integrate those into your routine for a week, a month? Like, how would somebody kind of baseline get jumped in on this?
Yeah, the best way to start, I'd say 2 things. First thing is go to the link that Chris just shared, or to beyondcoffeebook.com, and you'll get an email that gives you the link of, we just changed it for the webinar for you all to get the full ebook. After the webinar, then people will just be able to get the first 2 chapters for free. And then my morning ritual stack, my daily stack. And you can start there with my morning ritual. I recommend to everyone, unless you are trying to conceive, pregnant, or nursing. I have turmeric in there as part of my daily stack, and turmeric is just not recommended for those things. And definitely check with your doctor if you were on any medications, just to make sure that it doesn't interact with any of your medications, like SSRIs for depression. Turmeric is not recommended for anyone that's taking SSRIs. But I'd say that's the first starting point, is what I take in the morning. It's what I recommend to everyone. And what I take is built off of just all of these years of research. And then the other place to start would be maybe at a few things. If you don't want to order, and I give links for people to order that on Amazon. I don't make any money off of it. It's just, you can look at the reviews. You can do your own research on each compound. I take 12 each morning, but you can look at those on the list that I give. And it is, really just straightforward for you to do your own research on these things. And they're very commonplace things, like turmeric, which is an Indian spice that's in 95% of Indian dishes, or ashwagandha. That's, yeah. And have you taken it, Chris?
Yeah, a lot. I have Laird Hamilton's like turmeric coffee creamer, and I'll drink like 1 or 2 of those every day, because that was like a good afternoon kind of coffee replacement for me, because it's like thick and creamy. It has like just a little bit of coconut sugar in it to make it taste real nice. And yeah, I've always loved turmeric and ginger and all that.
Yeah, that's great. And turmeric and ginger are great anti-inflammatories, and our body wastes about 10% of its energy on inflammation, unnecessary inflammation. And that could be a cold that you're trying to fight off, or a allergen in your stomach, something that you just ate, pollen, twisted ankle, and working out. Our body is spending a lot of energy on, especially as we age, unnecessary energy on the anti-inflammatory response to couple the pro-inflammatory response. Turmeric is a great way to get that energy back as a natural anti-inflammatory, just to assist your body's natural anti-inflammation. It's also, in 2016, it was proven as effective as Prozac as an antidepressant. Wow. So these things are so the place to start, I'd say, is beyondcoffeebook.com to get the list of things that I take each morning and look at those. But the other place to start is a few things that I'd say. Turmeric is one of them, that everyone can incorporate in their morning or afternoon rituals.
Got to mix it with black pepper, from what I've been told.
That's right. So on my list, I give a recommendation for a turmeric compound that is mixed with biopurine. But yeah, piperine and black pepper is the active ingredient in black pepper that makes turmeric more bioavailable. You can absorb more of it. But if you buy any turmeric supplement on Amazon is a great resource to buy these things, especially from the reputable brands. This is not an area that you really want to go cheap, because supplements in general can have wheat fillers, crappy just flour fillers. They can have, that's on the best case for a cheap supplement. Worst case for a cheap supplement is that it has heavy metals in them, and it's just I would say it's worth a little bit more to find the best reviewed things. The things that I recommend are all not only well reviewed, but highly respected brands. Turmeric, matcha as a replacement for coffee. Matcha is, if you take away kind of 3 compounds to add to your morning stack and morning rituals, I would say remove coffee and switch to matcha. You can add in some coconut creamer, or there's a So Delicious coconut creamer brand that is unbelievable. Milk and eggs are two of the biggest pro-inflammatory foods that someone can consume. So I try to move people away from dairy because of just the sap on the energy that dairy can have. But you can also use your favorite coffee creamer, add it to a cup of matcha. If you don't like matcha just straight, it's amazing, very tasty. But matcha has less caffeine, about half the caffeine of a cup of coffee, but it also has two things that are really important. L-theanine from green tea, but a lot more of it, because matcha is essentially green tea leaves ground up. So it is the whole green tea leaf. So you're going to get a lot more L-theanine, and you're also going to get a lot more antioxidants. Green tea is touted for its antioxidants. Matcha has 130 times more antioxidants than green tea. So matcha is the way to go. There's also some research that's burgeoning right now around this additional aspect of matcha called catechins, that the caffeine potentially binds to these complex molecules called catechins that helps extend the absorption of caffeine even further. And so even more so than green tea, matcha could have an even longer kind of nature's time release version of caffeine with matcha. And then like I touched on a little bit ago, L-theanine just helps calm you down. So turmeric, matcha, and then the third thing that I'd go with for people is lion's mane mushrooms. There are two interesting things that I think a lot about within the mushroom space. Actually, I'm not going to mention them. You got to read the book to get them. But got to leave some good info for people to want to read the book. But I will mention lion's mane would be the other third thing that you add to the stack, because it's a great just additional source of energy that nature gives us that doesn't have the spike and energy that caffeine has, and then the subsequent come down. All right, I'll mention one more tidbit. How are we on time, Chris?
Oh, we're doing good. If you're good, yeah, we're doing well. John in the comments just said, "This is fantastic. Just ordered the paperback from Amazon. I'm going to order more for stocking stuffers." Hey, got it for free, but still buying the physical one. So yeah.
Yeah, that would be I think it's $11 on Amazon. So if anyone wants to order on Amazon for the physical copy, greatly appreciate it. Feel free to leave a review, because that I think also helps. But it's been cool to see it become a bestseller within the health space, the health category on.
And I will post the Amazon link for everybody as well. So you can, if you want to check it out on there, if you want to pick up a paperback copy, or if you want to leave a review, yeah, those are always very, very helpful.
Yes, it's more helpful than, even if it's a 3-word review. But the other thing that I mentioned on the mushrooms, so we talked about nootropics, we talked about adaptogens, a little bit on mushrooms. So the way that caffeine works on the brain is that we accumulate this neurotransmitter called adenosine. And adenosine is the neurotransmitter that tells us we're tired, tells us we're fatigued, and it builds over the course of the day saying, "Hey, Chris, hey, James, let's take a nap. Let's go to sleep." Caffeine blocks that neurotransmission. So your body doesn't recognize we're getting tired. It's still accumulating, but it doesn't recognize that we're actually getting tired. It's like having the check engine light on your car and the engine actually having a problem and just getting rid of the check engine light. Your engine still has a problem. You're still getting tired. You're still getting fatigued. But nature also provides us things like cordyceps mushrooms, which actually work on the actual energy source in your body. The nuclear core for your body is in the mitochondria of your cells. The mitochondria produces this stuff called ATP. That's like real fuel that's the engine. So if you want to take the engine light off for the morning or the afternoon to where you can crush through work, you drink caffeine. If you want to actually improve the engine, then you want to work on the mitochondria to produce more ATP. Stimulants or coffee, we're just so used to things working in 30 minutes and 45 minutes. We're like, that works, coffee works. But if you actually invest 7-8 days into the mitochondrial side of things, the actual energy production, obviously getting rid of the check engine light is much easier than fixing the engine. But if you take the time to improve the engine, things like cordyceps mushrooms, things like PQQ or creatine, or honestly muscle mass, building muscle mass, that will actually improve the production of ATP, the real fuel for your energy, and improve the actual engine itself. And the way to do that would be to take lion's mane mushrooms or cordyceps mushrooms, build muscle mass through exercising, and some of the other compounds, PQQ or creatine. But it takes 7-8 days. Sometimes for building muscle mass, that can take 3 or 4 weeks. If you can invest in that, then you're going to have a much better engine. You're going to be much more productive. And I just had no freaking clue about any of this stuff. 6 years ago, I was just like, caffeine gives me energy. And that's actually not true. It gives you the illusion of energy. There are a few other things that nature gives us that actually give you more energy. And it's just, you don't feel it within 30 minutes. And that's that subjective experience 200 years ago, 300 years ago. Well, there was no scientific method. That's all we had was subjective experience. That's all you and I probably had when we first had our cup of coffee, was subjective experience. Oh, this works. But now the science is pretty clear. We have way more at our fingertips than just caffeine and just coffee. And hence the book.
Yeah. I remember reading about caffeine naps back in the day. And the idea was basically like you would drink a cup of coffee and then take a nap, and the nap would help like wipe out the adenosine, and then the caffeine would just flood in and then block those receptors. So then as you're getting more tired throughout the day, the adenosine just can't be reuptaked. And so you're just like tricking your body into not getting tired. And it's like, that doesn't seem like the most sustainable way to approach it versus, those methods that you just laid out. So with the muscle building, is that just you're like increasing the like mitochondrial density in the muscle, so you just have more energy being created?
Yeah. So it's you, when you're, and it can be push-ups, it can be pull-ups. Again, it doesn't need to be an hour. And like, I don't have a gym membership. It's I've got weight bands. I go for runs, and I use Peloton, for they've got great classes for actual core workouts, strength training. I had no idea about these classes a year ago. I just thought it was known for the cycle, the actual stationary bike. But the classes, the yoga classes and the core strength training classes,
I didn't know they had that.
Yeah, and I think maybe someone can write in the comments if they know. I think you can get those without the actual bike.
Interesting.
So, but again, finding the ways to where you can do this, and you can obviously there are great YouTube videos on whatever muscle group you're trying to build. I mean, it's free. You do not even need a Peloton. My wife we got one when our daughter was born, and it's very useful. But the muscle building, building the muscle just triggers your entire body to say, okay, we need to gear up for our mitochondrial density because we're going into battle. We are needing to invest. It's like the opposite of a bear eating for hibernation. Your body, just like hormesis and hormetic stress from fasting, your body feels this stress and says, okay, we are training for something. We're preparing for something. And your body just starts to respond with improved mitochondrial density and starts to produce more ATP from your mitochondria. And if you couple that with something like cordyceps mushrooms or PQQ, then your body starts to thank you even more. And cordyceps are a newer mushroom, and I wish there was more double-blind, peer-reviewed research on it, but the early research is compelling, that both of it being right at the intersection of what you want with something, efficacy and safety, of being both safe and effective at improving endurance for getting through the day or endurance in a marathon through the production of ATP.
Yeah, I've taken cordyceps. I've taken the Onnit cordyceps before doing one of their classes, and I've definitely noticed it, like similar to effects I would have. I feel like with creatine or things like that, where I would feel that more sustained throughout a workout, where normally I could do like 8 on a bench press, I'm being able to push through 10 or more or something like that. So yeah, it is interesting playing around with those things and just kind of seeing what it's like for everybody's individual biochemistry and check it out, run it a couple times, do it for a week or a month or whatever you would recommend, and just seeing what impacts it will have on you.
Yeah, no, I would love to hear from people on Twitter. They can let me know after 2 weeks of trying my morning stack. And again, I make no money off it. I'm not trying to. There's no affiliation with any of these brands. So try it for 2 weeks and let me know how you feel on Twitter and at James Beshara. You can just shoot me a tweet. I would love to hear if it works for you.
Awesome. Well, James, I think this is a great place for us to wrap it up. I can't believe it's been over an hour and a half. We had it slated for an hour, but I think we got a lot of great stuff out of this. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think people in the comments as well had a really good time. So thank you very much for joining us and kind of walking through your journey and how you got to this point, and then also giving away this book to everybody. So for folks in the comments, we have the link in there. It's going to be live for the next 24 hours. So if you want to pick up a full free copy, digital download of the book, Beyond Coffee, you can snag that there. Thank you guys for joining us. And James, do you have any last things you want to say to everybody before we sign off?
No, thank you for all the kind words and all the comments that are flowing in, and thank you all for checking this out and for checking out the book. Like I said, let me know what you think. We're always eager for the feedback and how to improve the book for version 2. I think there will be a version 2 next year. Just we had to say, okay, this is enough supplements, enough compounds to put it out there. But I think I think there will be a version 2 in 2020, and I'd really love feedback from people. So please send it my way. Thank you, Chris, for having me on the webinar. And yeah, thank you to AppSumo for doing this for founders, creators, for startup folks. It's a really cool way to have this conversation around something like this book and have it more about creation, entrepreneurship, peak performance in kind of a deeper way than just, I guess, the way the term is conventionally used today.
Yeah, excellent. Well, you are more than welcome. We really appreciate it. And thank you very much. Sumo Links, thank you guys very much. Let's give James a round of applause for hopping on and sharing all of this with you guys. And pick up a copy of the book. Let James know what you think on Twitter. And yes, there will be a replay. We'll be sending that out later today once the recording finalizes. So if you missed anything, you can check all of that out there. We'll also be sending another link to the book in case you miss it in here. But that is all I have for you guys. So James, once again, thank you very much for hopping on.
Thank you, Chris. And for because of time, if we didn't get to the audience questions, sorry, but hopefully the book will help answer the questions you might have. So thank you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. We'll talk soon. Appreciate you guys.
All right.
Bye-bye. Take care.